My husband demanded I sign divorce papers after 22 years of marriage. "I've found someone who makes me happy," he said coldly, avoiding my eyes. I signed them with a smile, though my heart was shattered. But little did he know I had been planning my next move for months. "I've found someone who makes me happy," Benjamin said coldly, avoiding my eyes as he pushed the divorce papers across our mahogany dining table. The table we'd picked out together when his business first took off. I signed them with a smile, though my heart was shattered into 1,000 pieces. What Benjamin didn't know was that I'd been planning my next move for months. "Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank you for joining me for another story of justice served. If you've ever felt underestimated or invisible in your own life, you'll connect with Samantha's journey. Consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps us continue sharing these powerful stories of people who refuse to remain victims. Now, let's dive into a tale of a marriage unraveled and a woman reclaiming her power." It started with a receipt. A simple piece of paper that changed everything. I was doing laundry, something I'd done faithfully every Sunday for 22 years, when I found it tucked in his suit pocket. The Overlook Hotel. A room for 2 champagne service strawberries. The date was our anniversary. While I'd been home alone with takeout and a bottle of wine I'd bought to celebrate, Benjamin had been celebrating with someone else. I wish I could say I confronted him immediately, but that's not what happened. Instead, I tucked the receipt back where I found it and continued folding his designer shirts, the ones I'd ironed perfectly for over 2 decades. That's when I noticed it, a faint scent of perfume that wasn't mine. Jasmine and vanilla. Flirtatious. Nothing like the subtle rose fragrance I'd worn since we met in college. That night, I stared at Benjamin across the dinner table, watching him check his phone every few minutes, smiling at messages that weren't from me. I wondered when exactly I'd become invisible. Was it gradual, like aging, or had there been a specific moment when he looked at me and no longer saw the woman he'd vowed to love forever? "Everything okay with the Henderson account?" I asked casually, referencing his biggest client. "Fine," he replied without looking up. "Just some details Vanessa is handling for me." Vanessa, his new executive assistant. 29 years old with perfect hair and a Stanford MBA. I'd met her at the company Christmas party 6 months earlier, noticed how she laughed at all Benjamin's jokes, touched his arm when she spoke to him. I'd dismissed my concerns as paranoia back then. Now I wondered if I'd simply been willfully blind. My entire adult life had been dedicated to Benjamin Reed Enterprises. While we were dating in our senior year of college, Benjamin shared his dream of starting his own financial consulting firm. "We'll build it together, Sam," he'd promised with that charismatic smile that made my heart flutter. "Your business degree and my connections will be unstoppable." And for a while we were. I postponed my plans for graduate school to help him launch the company. I worked alongside him for those first 5 years. Unpaid, of course, because we were investing in our future. I crafted proposals, networked with potential clients, stayed up late reviewing contracts. When we finally could afford to hire actual employees, I gracefully stepped back into the role of supportive wife. "You've done enough," Benjamin had assured me. "Now focus on making our home perfect." And I did. I threw dinner parties that impressed his clients. I joined the right charity boards. I became the perfect corporate wife, always smiling, always agreeable, always there. Meanwhile, my own ambitions collected dust like the business degree hanging in my home office, an office I hadn't properly used in years. Somewhere along the way, Benjamin's we became I. His success. His company. His achievement. The woman who'd helped him craft his first business plan became just his wife, and eventually, just an accessory to be displayed at company functions. The systematic exclusion happened so gradually I barely noticed it happening. First, I was no longer invited to strategy meetings. Then Benjamin stopped discussing new clients with me. By our 15th anniversary, he'd established a separate business account I didn't have access to, just to simplify tax matters, he'd explained. I accepted each change, each small erosion of our partnership, with the grace expected of me. 3 years ago, something shifted in Benjamin. The late nights at the office became more frequent. The business trips multiplied. He installed a fingerprint lock on his home office door. Corporate security requirements, he claimed. His phone was never left unattended, and he took calls in hushed tones on our back patio, ending conversations abruptly when I approached. I started paying attention to the details. Credit card statements showing dinners for two at restaurants we'd never visited together. A second cell phone I discovered while searching for batteries in his desk drawer. Email notifications that flashed across his laptop screen from accounts I didn't recognize. The numbers didn't add up either. Benjamin's declared income on our tax returns seemed oddly disconnected from our lifestyle upgrades. The vacation home in Aspen, the boat, the vintage car collection. When I casually inquired about a particular investment that seemed to appear from nowhere, Benjamin patted my hand condescendingly. "Don't worry your pretty head about the complicated stuff, Sam. I've got it handled." That patronizing dismissal awakened something in me. I began paying closer attention to the company financials that occasionally crossed our home fax machine. I noticed discrepancies, large sums moving through shell companies, questionable deductions, revenue that seemed to vanish before making it to official reports. Still, I might have continued my silent observations indefinitely if not for what happened last month. Benjamin had forgotten his tablet at home. Unprecedented carelessness from a man who guarded his digital life so carefully. The notification appeared while I was dusting nearby. Meeting confirmed. Overlook Hotel. 8 p.m. tonight. I didn't plan to follow him. But 22 years of accumulated doubts and dismissals pushed me into my car that evening. I watched from across the street as Benjamin checked in, looking nervously over his shoulder. 30 minutes later, Vanessa arrived, wearing a black dress that accentuated everything I had lost to age and resignation. I didn't confront them. Instead, I drove home in perfect silence, a strange calm settling over me. The betrayal hurt, of course, but the revelation was almost a relief. Now I understood. Now I could see clearly. That night I began my research. Not just into their affair but into the company's finances. I created a private email account. I photographed documents. I recorded conversations. I contacted an old friend from college who specialized in financial forensics. For 3 months I built my case while playing the role of oblivious wife. And when Benjamin finally decided to discard me for his younger model, I was ready. I signed those divorce papers with a smile, not because I was strong, but because I knew what was coming. The next day his company would receive an anonymous tip about tax fraud, $28 million worth. The IRS would raid his office within hours. Sometimes revenge doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers, patient and meticulous, gathering strength in the shadows. That morning, before the IRS would receive my carefully compiled evidence, I woke to the sound of Benjamin's expensive Italian shoes clicking across our marble foyer. He'd been staying at the office for 3 nights, but I knew better. The Overlook Hotel kept his credit card on file now. I pulled my robe around me and descended the stairs, finding him in our kitchen. He wasn't alone. A thin man with wire-rimmed glasses sat at our island counter, a leather portfolio open before him. "Samantha," Benjamin said, his voice businesslike and empty. "This is Alan Grossman, my attorney." Not our attorney, the one we'd used for 22 years. His attorney. The distinction was intentional, the first cut of many to come. I nodded politely while measuring the coffee grounds for my morning brew, maintaining the facade of normalcy that had become second nature. "Would either of you like some coffee?" "We don't have time," Benjamin replied shortly. He wore his power suit, charcoal gray, custom-tailored in Manhattan. The one he saved for closing major deals. How fitting that he'd wear it to close our marriage. Alan cleared his throat. "Mrs. Reed, we have some matters to discuss." He pulled a document from his portfolio and slid it across our kitchen island, the exact spot where, 19 years earlier, we'd popped champagne when Benjamin landed his first 6-figure contract. I had surprised him with his favorite meal that night, and we'd made love right there on the counter, drunk on success and possibility. The divorce papers stared up at me, sterile and official. Benjamin didn't meet my eyes. "I've been unhappy for some time, Sam," he began, reciting what was clearly a rehearsed speech. His hands didn't fidget the way they normally did when he spoke from the heart. This was Benjamin in negotiation mode. Calculated, controlled, convincing. 22 years is a long time, I said quietly, running my finger along the edge of the papers. "Too long to stay in something that isn't working," he replied. "We've grown apart. We want different things." I noticed he was standing by the door, maintaining his distance as if I might become hysterical or throw something. The Benjamin who once knew me so well now had no idea who I was. The real me, the one who had been meticulously planning while he conducted his affair, remained invisible to him. "The settlement is fair," Alan interjected, pushing a separate document toward me. "Mr. Reed is prepared to be quite generous." I skimmed the terms while sipping my coffee. The generous offer was anything but. The beach house in North Carolina would be sold, with Benjamin keeping 70% of the proceeds. The primary residence, this house I had decorated and maintained for 2 decades, would be his entirely, with 60 days for me to relocate. I would receive a one-time payment that amounted to roughly 3 years of Benjamin's declared income. Most tellingly, I would relinquish all claims to his business ventures, including future earnings from investments made during our marriage. "You helped establish Reed Enterprises," I said, looking directly at Benjamin. "I put my career on hold. I worked without salary for 5 years." A flash of discomfort crossed his face, quickly replaced by cool detachment. "That was a long time ago, Sam. The company's growth over the past 15 years has had nothing to do with you. Except it did. I knew about the Henderson acquisition that doubled their market share. A deal that happened because I'd befriended Mrs. Henderson at a charity gala. I knew about the government contract secured after I'd spent months coaching Benjamin on his presentation. I knew about the initial investors who came through my father's connections. I've found someone who makes me happy," Benjamin continued, checking his watch. "Vanessa and I." "Your executive assistant," I stated flatly. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Vanessa understands the demands of my position. She shares my vision for the future." What he meant was, she's 29 and impressed by his wealth. She hasn't seen him fail or doubt himself. She believes the mythology of Benjamin Reed's self-made success story, without understanding the messy, collaborative reality of how businesses actually grow. "She's young," I observed, keeping my tone neutral. "It's not about age," he snapped defensively. "It's about connection. About finding someone who sees the real me." I almost laughed at the irony. The real Benjamin had disappeared years ago, replaced by this carefully constructed persona of corporate success. He couldn't even recognize how rehearsed he sounded, delivering lines that divorced men had been using for generations. Alan shifted uncomfortably, glancing between us. "Perhaps Mrs. Reed would like time to review the documents with her own attorney." "That won't be necessary," I replied, reaching for the Mont Blanc pen Benjamin had given me on our 15th anniversary. "I understand perfectly." Their surprise was palpable. They had expected tears, recriminations, perhaps bargaining. They had prepared for a scene. Instead, I signed each page with a practiced smile, the kind I'd perfected at hundreds of corporate functions over the years. "I wish you happiness, Benjamin," I said, meaning it more than he could possibly understand. By tomorrow afternoon his world would collapse like a house of cards. Alan gathered the documents, clearly puzzled by my cooperation. Benjamin seemed simultaneously relieved and suspicious. "You can stay in the house until you find somewhere suitable," he offered, a weak gesture toward generosity now that I'd surrendered so easily. "That's kind of you." I maintained eye contact until he looked away first. After they left, I poured another cup of coffee and allowed myself 10 minutes to feel the grief. Not for losing Benjamin, but for the years I'd lost being Mrs. Reed instead of Samantha. Then I got to work. That night was the last I'd spend in our bed. Sleep eluded me as I spread documents across the antique writing desk in my bedroom. Tax returns showing inexplicable discrepancies, bank statements from Cayman Island accounts, corporate ledgers with convenient errors that always benefited Benjamin. Photographic evidence of cash payments to building inspectors. Emails discussing creative accounting practices that crossed ethical and legal lines. For 3 years, I'd been gathering evidence while pretending I didn't understand the complexities of corporate finance. Every time Benjamin patronizingly told me not to worry my pretty head about business matters, I'd added another document to my collection. Every time he excluded me from meetings I should have attended, I found another piece of the puzzle. By dawn my eyes were burning but my resolve was ironclad. I organized the final package of evidence, encrypting the digital files and preparing the email that would land in the IRS Criminal Investigation Division's inbox at precisely 9 a.m. I included specifics about $28 million in fraudulent deductions, hidden income streams, and deliberate misrepresentations on tax filings over 8 consecutive years. As the sun rose, I showered and dressed carefully, selecting a simple blue dress that had always been Benjamin's favorite. Today marked the end of our marriage, but it also marked the beginning of my reclamation. By sunset, Benjamin would understand the true cost of underestimating the woman who had stood in his shadow for 22 years. My plan had actually begun 3 months earlier, long before Benjamin presented those divorce papers. The day after discovering his affair with Vanessa, I drove 30 miles to a public library in a neighboring county. I couldn't risk using our home computer or my personal devices. Benjamin had insisted on installing security software on everything we owned after a supposed corporate hack. The elderly librarian barely glanced up as I signed in using my maiden name. I selected a computer in the far corner back to the wall and created a new email address. truth.finder2023@gmail.com. Generic. Untraceable. Perfect. That first day, I uploaded only 3 documents. Copies of tax returns from 2018 that showed clear discrepancies between reported income and actual deposits. I needed to be methodical. Careful. If this was going to work, the evidence had to be irrefutable. For weeks afterward, I developed a routine. Tuesdays and Thursdays, Benjamin had standing dinner meetings that routinely ran late. I told him I'd joined a book club. He was so disinterested in my activities that he never questioned it. Instead of discussing literature with suburban housewives, I spent those evenings at different libraries across the county, building my case piece by piece. One particularly rainy Tuesday, I sat in my parked car, hands trembling as I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. "Sarah Williams speaking," answered a brisk, professional voice. "Sarah? It's Samantha Reed. From Westlake College." The momentary silence was followed by genuine warmth. "Sam? Oh my God, it's been 5 years since your Christmas card? How are you?" I swallowed hard. "I need advice, Sarah. Professional advice. It's complicated." Sarah and I had been roommates for 4 years in college. While I'd followed Benjamin into his business ventures, she had pursued a career in forensic accounting, eventually becoming a specialist with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. We'd drifted apart over the years. My fault mostly as I retreated further into Benjamin's world, but had maintained occasional contact. "This sounds serious," she said, her tone shifting. "Do you want to meet?" We arranged to meet at a cafe in Rockville, nearly an hour from my home. Sarah looked exactly as I remembered. Practical haircut, sensible shoes, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. I felt a pang of regret for letting this friendship fade. "Before you tell me anything," she said after we ordered coffee, "you should understand I'm bound by certain professional obligations." "I know," I replied. "That's why I need your guidance. Hypothetically speaking, what's the proper procedure for documenting potential tax fraud without becoming implicated yourself?" Her eyebrows rose slightly. "This hypothetical situation, would it involve someone close to you?" "A spouse." My voice remained steady. "A spouse who has systematically hidden income, created false business expenses and transferred funds to offshore accounts for nearly a decade." Sarah's expression remained neutral, but her eyes softened with understanding. "Innocent spouse relief exists for a reason, Sam. Many partners genuinely don't know what their significant others are doing financially. And if that spouse has suspected something was wrong but didn't have proof until recently?" She sipped her coffee thoughtfully. "Document everything from the moment of discovery forward. Show that you took reasonable steps once you became aware. The IRS distinguishes between willful blindness and genuine ignorance." Over the next hour, Sarah, without ever directly advising me to report Benjamin, explained whistleblower provisions, documentation requirements, and the importance of establishing a clear timeline. She never asked for specifics, maintaining plausible deniability, but provided exactly the framework I needed. "Whatever you decide," she said as we parted, "protect yourself first." That conversation gave me the confidence to take my next step. I contacted Professor James Harrington, who had taught my business law class during my brief stint in law school before I dropped out to help Benjamin launch his company. Now semi-retired, Harrington agreed to meet me for lunch, curious about the student who had shown such promise before disappearing from the program. "Innocent spouse relief isn't automatic," he explained after hearing my hypothetical situation. "You'll need to demonstrate you had no actual knowledge or reason to know about the understatements on the return." "Even if we filed jointly?" I asked. Especially then. But there's a reasonableness standard applied. The IRS considers educational background, financial conditions, and whether there were lavish or unusual expenditures compared to your normal lifestyle. He studied me over his glasses. Your background in business and accounting might work against you, but your gradual exclusion from company matters helps your case. With Sarah's and Professor Harrington's guidance, I refined my approach. I began methodically separating my finances from Benjamin's without raising suspicion. I opened a new bank account at a credit union using my maiden name and gradually transferred small amounts from my personal allowance account. I documented each instance when Benjamin refused to discuss company finances with me, recording dates and exact phrases in a journal I kept locked in my car. Meanwhile, I continued gathering evidence. Benjamin's carelessness grew as his relationship with Vanessa intensified. He left financial statements in his home office, forgot to lock his computer, and sometimes discussed questionable business practices on speakerphone, unaware I was within earshot. Each slip provided another piece for my growing file. The trickiest part was maintaining our routine while silently preparing for its collapse. I still cooked Benjamin's favorite meals, maintained our social calendar, and played the role of devoted wife at company functions. I even endured Vanessa's presence at the annual company picnic, smiling politely while she stood too close to my husband, her hand casually touching his arm as they laughed at private jokes. On the morning after signing the divorce papers, I made my final preparations. I drove to a small internet cafe 3 towns over, paid cash for an hour of computer time, and uploaded the complete dossier to the secure IRS portal. 8 years of tax fraud. Multiple shell companies. Hidden accounts in the Caymans and Switzerland. Falsified expense reports. Cash transactions designed to avoid reporting requirements. Properties purchased through anonymous LLCs. The evidence was overwhelming. $28 million in fraudulent activity, carefully documented and annotated. I included a detailed timeline showing Benjamin's systematic efforts to conceal his actions from me, along with documentation of my gradual exclusion from company matters. I filed for innocent spouse relief simultaneously through a separate channel, following Sarah's guidance to protect myself. As I hit send on the anonymous tip, I felt no triumph, only a hollow sense of completion. This wasn't about revenge, not entirely. It was about justice, about consequences, about reclaiming some small measure of dignity from a man who had discarded me after 22 years as if I were nothing. 3 hours later, Benjamin texted to let me know he'd moved the last of his essential belongings to his temporary apartment. We both knew he meant Vanessa's place. He asked if I needed anything before he left the keys. I replied with a single word, no. By morning his world would change forever. The irony wasn't lost on me that after years of dismissing my business acumen, it would be my meticulous documentation that brought down his empire. The woman he underestimated would be the architect of his downfall. I slept surprisingly well that night, better than I had in months. When my alarm chimed at 6:30 a.m., I rose with purpose, dressed in a simple gray suit, professional but understated, and drove downtown. Benjamin's office occupied the top 3 floors of the Meridian building, a gleaming glass structure that dominated the skyline. I parked in the public garage 2 blocks away and walked to Maggie's Cafe, which offered a perfect view of the building's entrance. "The usual, Mrs. Reed?" asked Maggie herself, a 60-something woman who'd been serving downtown professionals for decades. "Just Samantha today," I replied with a genuine smile. "And yes, the usual." I took a window seat and sipped my latte, watching the morning rush of employees entering the building. Benjamin would arrive at precisely 8:15 as he had for 20 years. Early enough to appear dedicated but late enough to make an entrance. His senior staff would already be there, preparing for the 8:30 meeting that started every day. At 9:47 a.m., much faster than I had anticipated, 3 unmarked sedans pulled up to the curb. 8 men and women in suits emerged, carrying briefcases and document boxes. Despite their casual appearance, something about their synchronized movements screamed federal agents. 2 uniformed police officers accompanied them, remaining by the entrance as the others proceeded inside. My phone buzzed at 9:52 a.m. "Benjamin." I silenced it and continued watching. Through the massive glass lobby I could see security trying to contact someone upstairs. More calls came. Benjamin again, then his assistant Claudia, then the company's general counsel. I let them all go to voicemail. At 10:14 a.m., I saw Benjamin himself burst from the elevator into the lobby, his face contorted with panic as he confronted the officers blocking the exit. Even from across the street I could read his body language. The aggressive gesturing, the entitled indignation, the gradual deflation as reality set in. My phone buzzed again. This time I answered. What the hell is happening? Benjamin's voice was tight with barely controlled fury. The IRS and FBI are here with search warrants. They're seizing computers and files. They're interviewing my staff. That sounds serious, I replied calmly. What do they want? They're claiming tax fraud, securities violations, and money laundering. It's nonsense. Someone's made false accusations. His breathing was erratic. I need you to come down here. They're asking about joint finances. I'm rather busy today, Benjamin. The divorce papers were quite clear about our separation. This isn't about the divorce, he shouted, then immediately lowered his voice. Sam, please. I need you. 17 years of building this company. I can't lose everything. The desperation in his voice might have moved me once. Now it felt like delayed justice. I have an appointment at 11, I said truthfully. I'll see what I can do afterward. My appointment was indeed at 11, with Special Agent Carlos Rivera at the federal building 6 blocks away. After an informal call that morning confirming receipt of my whistleblower filing, he had requested an in-person meeting to discuss my innocent spouse relief claim. Rivera was younger than I expected, perhaps 40, with kind eyes that contrasted with his precise, methodical questioning. After establishing that our conversation was being recorded, he led me through my history with Benjamin Reed Enterprises. When did you first become suspicious of financial irregularities, Mrs. Reed? I described my gradual exclusion from company matters, the lifestyle that exceeded our reported income, the strange calls and hidden documents. And why didn't you report these suspicions earlier? This was the critical question. The one that would determine whether I was an innocent spouse or a complicit partner. I had suspicions, not evidence, I explained. Benjamin told me the business was too complex for me to understand. After years of hearing that, I began to believe it. I showed Rivera the journal documenting specific instances when Benjamin refused to discuss finances, the email exchanges where he deflected my questions, the separate accounts to which I had no access. You have a business degree, Rivera noted. You helped start the company. Yes, but Benjamin systematically pushed me out once we could afford employees. He controlled all financial information. When we filed taxes, he presented me with signature pages, not complete returns. By the end of our 2-hour interview, Rivera seemed satisfied with my cooperation, though he maintained professional neutrality about my innocent spouse claim. We'll need to speak again, he said as we concluded. In the meantime, please don't discuss this investigation with anyone, especially your husband. As I left the federal building, my phone showed 27 missed calls from Benjamin, along with dozens of text messages ranging from pleading to threatening. I scrolled through them while sitting in my car. Please call me immediately. This is a misunderstanding I can explain. I need you to tell them you handled the household accounts. If they freeze our assets, we'll both have nothing. I swear I'll make this divorce hell if you don't help me. The final message, sent just 15 minutes earlier, chilled me. You did this, didn't you? This is your revenge. I didn't respond to any of them. 2 days later, Rivera called to request another meeting. This time he wasn't alone. Special Agent Diana Wong from the Securities and Exchange Commission joined us, along with an assistant U.S. attorney named Mark Daniels. Mrs. Reed, we've made some significant discoveries since we last spoke, Rivera began, his tone more formal with the others present. We believe you should be aware of them as they may impact your financial situation. Wong opened a folder. We've determined that Vanessa Clark wasn't just involved romantically with your husband. She appears to have been an active participant in manipulating financial records. They showed me emails between Benjamin and Vanessa discussing creative accounting solutions, dating back 3 years. Almost from the moment she joined the company. In one particularly damning exchange, Benjamin instructed Vanessa to make sure Sam never sees these accounts, with her reply promising complete discretion. Ms. Clark received substantial bonuses tied to the periods of most significant financial manipulation, Daniels added. She also received gifts, jewelry, a car, a down payment on her condo, that correlate with specific instances of fraudulent reporting. The betrayal shouldn't have hurt. I'd already discovered Benjamin's infidelity, already signed divorce papers, but something about seeing their conspiracy laid bare reopened wounds I thought had sealed. Then came the real shock. The most concerning discovery, Rivera continued, involves the employee pension fund. He explained that Benjamin had diverted approximately $4.3 million from the company's employee retirement accounts, replacing proper investments with essentially worthless shares in his shell companies. Dozens of loyal employees, people I knew, people who had attended our holiday parties and trusted Benjamin with their futures, would have discovered their retirement savings decimated when they needed them most. The company had a matching program, I whispered. People put their life savings in those accounts. Yes, Wong confirmed. And it appears these diversions began shortly after Ms. Clark took over benefits administration 3 years ago. The enormity of Benjamin's betrayal finally hit me. Not just his betrayal of me but of everyone who had trusted him. Loyal employees who had worked nights and weekends to help build his dream. Clients who had put faith in his financial guidance. My parents who had invested their retirement funds in his first venture. To my embarrassment, I broke down sobbing in front of the 3 federal officers. Not delicate tears, but ugly, racking sobs that came from somewhere deep and wounded. I'm sorry, I managed between gasps. I knew he was defrauding the government, but I never imagined he would steal from his own employees. Agent Wong silently pushed a box of tissues toward me while Rivera poured a glass of water. They waited patiently as I struggled to regain composure. Mrs. Reed, Daniels said gently when I had calmed, your cooperation and documentation have been invaluable. Based on everything we've seen, I'll be supporting your innocent spouse relief claim. As I drove home that evening, Benjamin called again. This time I answered. They're saying I stole from the pension fund, he said without preamble, his voice hollow. They're freezing everything. They took my passport. I remained silent, letting the gravity of his situation sink in. Did you know? He finally asked. About the whistleblower? Goodbye, Benjamin, I said quietly and ended the call. Justice I was discovering didn't feel like triumph. It felt like mourning, for the man I thought I had married, for the years I had lost, and for the innocents caught in the crossfire of his greed. The weeks following Benjamin's arrest passed in a blur of legal meetings and paperwork. My innocent spouse relief claim moved forward with surprising efficiency, bolstered by Agent Rivera's support and the mountain of evidence I'd provided. The IRS and SEC had frozen most of our joint assets, but my attorney secured an emergency living expenses allowance that gave me breathing room to plan my next steps. I left our sprawling suburban home without regret, taking only personal belongings and family heirlooms. The designer furniture, the artwork selected to impress Benjamin's clients, the kitchen gadgets I'd never used. I left it all behind, shedding the trappings of a life that had slowly suffocated me. My temporary residence was a modest hotel suite downtown, paid for with the small emergency fund I'd established during those months of preparation. Each morning I walked to a nearby cafe, ordered coffee, and made lists of what I needed to do to rebuild my life at 53. On a particularly sunny Tuesday, I found myself staring at the contact information for Martin Weber, my former supervisor at Davis and Weber Accounting, where I'd worked before leaving to help Benjamin start his business. On impulse, I dialed the number, expecting to reach his assistant or perhaps learn he'd retired. Weber speaking, came the familiar gruff voice. Martin? It's Samantha Reed. Well, I'll be returning to Samantha Davis soon. Sam. The surprise in his voice quickly turned to warmth. I've been following the news about Reed Enterprises. Terrible business. Are you all right? That simple question of genuine concern nearly undid me. For 22 years, Benjamin had asked how I was only as a prelude to talking about himself. I'm finding my way, I answered honestly. Actually, I was wondering if you might have time for coffee? I could use some professional advice. We met the following day at his firm's offices. Martin had aged well, his hair now silver but his handshake still firm, his mind still sharp. He listened attentively as I outlined my situation, nodding occasionally but reserving judgment. So, I concluded, I need to restart my career after a 22-year detour. Any suggestions? Martin leaned back in his chair. Actually, we have an interesting situation here. Our compliance and fraud detection division has grown significantly. We're looking for someone with a unique perspective. Someone who understands how these schemes work from the inside. You're offering me a job? I asked, stunned. I'm suggesting a conversation with our department head, he clarified. Your experience, both professional and personal, would be invaluable. Plus, you always had a gift for spotting irregularities in financial statements. 2 interviews later, I was employed again for the first time in over 2 decades, with my own office and a team that respected my insights. The irony wasn't lost on me. Benjamin's financial crimes had inadvertently revived the career I'd abandoned for him. As my professional life stabilized, I faced another challenge: Benjamin's arraignment. My attorney advised that my presence wasn't required, but after considerable reflection I decided to attend. Not for revenge or satisfaction, but for the closure I needed to fully move forward. The federal courthouse was imposing, all marble and mahogany, designed to intimidate with its grandeur. I sat in the back row wearing a simple navy dress, no makeup, my wedding ring conspicuously absent. Benjamin entered with his attorney, his shoulders hunched in an ill-fitting suit that had once been tailored to perfection. Gone were the designer glasses and the confident swagger. He looked older, diminished somehow, scanning the courtroom with nervous eyes. When he spotted me, he froze momentarily. Something passed across his face, not anger as I'd expected, but a profound sadness tinged with what appeared to be genuine regret. For the first time in years, he truly saw me, not as an extension of himself or a convenient support system, but as Samantha, a whole person he had gradually erased. He nodded slightly in acknowledgement. I returned the gesture but remained expressionless. We had nothing left to say to each other. The proceedings were brief and procedural. Benjamin pled not guilty to 17 federal charges, including tax evasion, wire fraud, and employee benefit plan theft. The judge denied bail given the severity of the charges and the flight risk. As they led Benjamin away, he glanced back at me one final time, a look that seemed to say both, "I'm sorry," and "How did we get here?" I left the courthouse feeling lighter, as if I'd set down a heavy burden I hadn't realized I was still carrying. 2 months later, I signed the lease on a downtown apartment, a corner unit on the 12th floor with floor-to-ceiling windows that bathed the space in natural light. It was less than a quarter the size of our former home but felt infinitely more comfortable. I furnished it simply with pieces I loved rather than items selected to impress others. My books, neglected for years while focusing on Benjamin's interests, once again filled shelves. My grandmother's quilt adorned my bed. My collection of beach glass, gathered from vacations Benjamin had always been too busy to enjoy with me, displayed in a bowl by the window. The letter from the IRS arrived 6 months after Benjamin's arrest. By then he had accepted a plea deal, admitting to reduced charges in exchange for cooperation against others involved in related schemes. Vanessa had also struck a deal, turning evidence against Benjamin to minimize her own sentence. I opened the envelope with steady hands. The whistleblower reward was substantial, 15% of the recovered funds, amounting to just over $4.2 million. The validation was sweet, but the money itself felt almost incidental. I had already reclaimed something far more valuable: my independence, my identity, my future. That evening I called Sarah, my college roommate who had provided that crucial initial guidance. "I need to do something meaningful with this money," I told her. "Something that matters." 2 weeks later, I filed paperwork establishing the New Beginnings Foundation, dedicated to supporting women rebuilding their lives after divorce and financial abuse. The foundation would provide emergency grants, legal assistance, career counseling, and financial literacy education. All the resources I wished I'd had during those first terrible days after my marriage collapsed. At the foundation's first board meeting, I shared my vision with the diverse group of professionals I'd assembled: lawyers, financial advisors, therapists, and community organizers. "Many women stay in bad situations because they can't see a way out financially," I explained. "We're going to change that." As spring arrived, I settled into my new routines. Mornings at the accounting firm, analyzing financial statements and training younger staff to recognize warning signs of fraud. Afternoons at the foundation, reviewing grant applications and developing programs. Evenings on my small balcony, watching the city lights emerge as dusk fell, often with a book in hand, a simple pleasure rediscovered. I ran into Benjamin's former assistant Claudia at a cafe near my office. After an initially awkward exchange, she thanked me. "The employees got most of their pension funds back because of you," she said quietly. "No one blames you for what happened." Her words healed something in me I hadn't realized was still wounded. I hadn't just taken revenge on Benjamin. I'd inadvertently protected people who would have been devastated by his actions. On the 1-year anniversary of signing those divorce papers, I hosted a small dinner party in my apartment. My first guests in my new home. Sarah was there along with Martin, my sister from Chicago, and 2 new friends from the foundation. As we raised glasses in a toast, I realized with startling clarity that I wasn't just surviving after Benjamin. I was thriving. The life I'd rebuilt from the ashes of my marriage wasn't a consolation prize. It was the life I should have had all along.